Hi folks, welcome to another cooking video with me, Graham. This week we were going to look at a recipe similar to the last one, which was of course Gamble stew. This one's going to be what I slightly jokingly refer to as Buttcheek stew, which is because it's made from oxtail and ox cheek. Now this is basically going to be, again, a very warming winter stew. This time obviously it's a beef stew, so it requires a few various different ingredients and a slightly different method of preparation. But on the whole, this is just going to be another very tasty, very hearty, good meal that's going to be very nice if you're having friends round over the winter months and you just fancy making something that's really going to fill people up and warm them. For this recipe, you'll require ox cheek and oxtail, carrots, potatoes, celery, leeks, onions, salt and pepper, dash of olive oil, paprika, sage, cumin, a bottle of Guinness, and stock of your choice. Now the first thing you want to do is start preparing the vegetables. To begin with, I'll start with the carrots here. I have chosen not to peel the carrots because I think that there's a lot of flavour in the skin of the carrots, and as long as you've given them a wash, possibly with a gentle scrubbing brush under some cold water and taking any mud and dirt off them, anything else that's on there isn't going to be harmful, and all it's going to do is add to the flavour. Now what you want to do, ideally, is cut them lengthwise and then chop them into rough portions, because this is, as after all, a stew. You want each piece to be a decent size for the mouth. Then just pop them into the casserole dish. Next, the same goes for the onions, the celery and the potatoes. For the celery, you want to cut the celery lengthwise and then chop it into pieces. Again, it doesn't matter if you do this roughly or if you do it very, very neatly. Ultimately, it's going in a stew, so it doesn't need to be perfectly aesthetically pleasing to the eye, as long as it looks decent. The leeks, on the other hand, are slightly trickier. With the leeks, what you want to do effectively is top and tail them, so remove the stalk end at the bottom and remove the open top. But after that, there's a very good technique that I was taught, which is to clean them out. Everything else, obviously, everything else should have been washed before you chopped it. As I said, no more than that, just a quick wash. Of course, it's very difficult to wash a leek because it's entirely segmented through the middle. So a good technique to use in that is actually to cut into the leek and cut it up halfway, and that way when you rinse it with water you can clean every single part, just in case some little beastie has crawled in it when it was growing that got stuck. Chop the leeks up in decent sizes, more or less the same sizes as you cut the celery. At this stage I like to give it a little bit of a shake, just to mix everything up. And you can season at this point as well. I would suggest at this point putting a small amount of salt and pepper just to taste. Now we can move on to the meat. The oxtail, I've got several pieces of it here, as you can tell has a very thick bone in the middle of it, that being the tailbone. Now the meat should be removed from that as well as possible, although to be honest it's not always the easiest, especially on smaller pieces of meat. You may have to just simply do the best you can. It's a good idea to keep the bone from the oxtail just to make soup or stock. The ox cheek, on the other hand, is a wonderful piece of meat which can be chopped up into hearty chunks and has a very different consistency from the tail. Obviously you could bulk this out if you wanted with any other type of beef. You could use skirt steak or braising beef, any of which, because it's going to be cooked for so long, it's not going to make any great shake to what the overall product will be like. You can use a piece of meat that's tougher, which is generally the best idea with a stew. Use a tough piece of meat, cook it for a long time, and then all of the sinew, any of the fat or sinew that's in it, will break down, and you'll be left with a wonderfully tender piece of meat. Unfortunately, I left this cheek in the deep freeze and it's not entirely defrosted at this point, which obviously won't make any difference considering how it's going to be cooked, but it does make a difference when trying to chop it, because it's tough meat made even tougher. Always, knife safety, keep your fingers and thumb turned away from the blade when you're using it. That way you're not going to cut yourself. If possible, angle the blade away from your fingers. Right. There we have it. Now, as with any stew at this stage, what we need to do is seal the meat and obviously season it. Then you go into the casserole dish with the rest of the vegetables and go into the oven. At this point it's a good idea to turn your oven on, ensure that it's set to about 180 degrees, just to heat it up, to give it a start. You may end up turning it down once you've actually put the stew in, depending on how long you want to cook it out. I find 150, 160 degrees is probably a good setting to have it on, especially if you're cooking for a long time. Ideally something like this needs to be cooked for about 3 or 4 hours, preferably 4, but obviously if you're doing it in less time, I would suggest you use a different type of meat. But really ideally 2.5 hours is the minimum time you want to cook this for, and even that's pushing it a little bit. But before you get that far, first thing we need to do is take a little olive oil, splash into the pan. Just make sure it's normal or mild olive oil. You don't want to be using extra virgin olive oil, partially because extra virgin olive oil can become carcinogenic if heated to super high temperatures, such as roasting. Also, the depth of flavour you get in extra virgin olive oil is destroyed by cooking it to any great temperature, so you're effectively wasting very good oil that should be used for salads and rice dishes. So I'm just heating up the frying pan, add in the meat. All we're doing at this stage is searing it all over, so basically you wanted to get on a high sizzle, put your seasoning into it, then you want to simply turn it as often as necessary till it's browned all over. You don't need to cook it all the way through, just browned all over. So I'm going to take some paprika first. Not much more than a dash of ground cumin because it's quite strong. I'll go it on. A couple of pinches of sage. Salt. And a good dash of pepper. Make sure you turn the meat off. Ensuring it gets cooked on all sides. At this stage, nothing left to do except tip it gently into the casserole dish. And you want to get everything out of there. You want everything off of the base of the pan, all the juices, all of that flavour. And I'm going to just gently try and mix, tin a bit, get everything together. Make sure that nothing is stuck into one place in the dish. Ready to add our stock. Now I've chosen to use chicken stock for this. You could obviously use beef stock. I just prefer the slightly difference in flavour that you get from that. You could obviously use lamb stock or vegetable stock as well. But I like the so that's about 1 litre of chicken stock, to which we will top off, as one always should when making a good stew, with beer, in this case Guinness, because Guinness goes with beef. Now you need to use the whole bottle, save a little bit for the chef. And at this stage we want to just add a little bit more salt, because we need to salt all that extra liquid. The stock that I used was made straight from chicken bones, so therefore it doesn't have any added salt that I didn't add myself, and I didn't add any. So, and you can never go wrong with a little extra pepper. Now, I'll give that a quick stir. Make sure it's all more or less ready. Put the lid on, and we're going to pop it in the oven. We'll leave it in the oven for approximately, at this stage, 2 hours, because there's no sense taking it out before there. You can check on it at the 1 hour mark. I generally don't bother, but see how things are getting along. If necessary, you can add a little bit more water if it's getting too dry. Otherwise, I generally wouldn't worry about that. As I said before, this is going in at about 180 degrees. I'm then going to turn it down to 160, and we're just going to leave it for 2 hours. Alright folks, well that's been 2 hours, so let's see how it's going. Looks amazing. Plenty of water still in there. Looks delicious. Anyway, at this point, there's not a lot I would say to do. You want to really keep it going like that for at least another, at least 1 hour, if not 2. So, at this stage, not much else to say except pop back in, reset the timer for an hour, and we'll come back and look then. Well, that's another hour up, so guess it's time to actually take it out of the oven and see what we've ended up with. That looks wonderful. Absolutely gorgeous stew. The meat's being crisped on top, but the actual flesh is falling apart. So delicate. Beautiful, beautiful meat. The vegetables, they're still holding together, but they're soft, ready to break apart with any real touch. And it smells absolutely divine. Grand. Right, well that's that more or less ready. All it needs now is a bowl and a big spoon.